good evening, and welcome to Films According to Chris Wyatt. Well, Halloween's right around the corner, so that means it's time for another series of horror movie reviews. So for today's film, let's take a look at the belated sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's little 1960 classic called Psycho.
Ah yes, Psycho. Can't say enough great things about this awesome movie. The film was released in 1960, based on a novel by Robert Bloch and directed by the legendary filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock. The story about an embezzling secretary and a mysterious motel manager with a strange obsession with his murderous mother is one of the most iconic films in the history of the medium. A highly controversial film, Psycho involved Hitchcock fighting with the censors for its, at the time, unheard of levels of violence and sexual content. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the movie's most memorable sequence, the infamous shower scene, where star Janet Leigh's character, Marion Crane, is brutally stabbed to death 40 minutes into the movie. Despite the controversy, Psycho was a huge hit, and its legacy has only improved over time. It's considered one of Hitchcock's greatest films, and has gone on to inspire countless horror thrillers over the years, namely those of the slasher film subgenre.
Psycho really is a great movie, and it's one of those films that gets better with every repeat viewing. Though it is one film that probably didn't need a sequel.
I know horror films often get sequels, but seriously? A sequel to Psycho? Released 22 years after the original and 3 years after Hitchcock's death? Hard to imagine this'll turn out well. Probably just going to be another entry in the collection of lackluster belated sequels to iconic horror movies, just like The Rage Carrie 2, Exorcist 2, or Look What Happened to Rosemary's Baby. Well, let's take a look at Psycho 2.
And by the way, quick warning here, I won't spoil anything in Psycho 2, but in order to properly review the film, I do have to reveal the ending of the first film. And believe me, if you haven't seen the first Psycho, that is one film you do not want spoiled. Alright? Just a quick heads up.
Psycho 2 begins.
Seriously, I am not joking. The original film has an incredible ending and should not be spoiled to anyone who hasn't seen the movie. So yeah, last chance. Okay? Alright.
Psycho 2 begins 22 years after the original. Norman Bates, once again played by Anthony Perkins, is being released from a mental institution after his psychiatrist has deemed him sane and fit to return to society. The decision was met with much protest, especially from the sister of Marion Crane, Lila Loomis, once again played by Vera Miles.
I have a petition here signed by 743 people against Norman Bates' release, including the relatives of the 7 people he murdered.
Despite the objections, Norman Bates returns home, prepares to reopen the motel, takes a job at a nearby diner, and even befriends Mary, a waitress working at that said diner. Norman is completely intent on reforming himself and living a peaceful life, but the demons of his past, not to mention a town on edge, haunt him, leaving both Norman and others to wonder if he truly is reformed, or if dear old mother has returned.
Alright, so let's see what problems we have so far. Well, the film takes place 2 decades after the original, so that feels kind of unnecessary. They switched from black and white into color, which isn't really a bad thing, but I don't know, I really liked the black and white cinematography from the original. And the premise in this one is that Norman Bates is a supposedly cured psychopath trying to readapt into society. And that is just absolutely a kind of interesting premise, actually.
The movie asks this question: is it possible for someone like Norman Bates, with a history of dangerous mental instabilities, to truly be cured and reintegrate into society? That's a solid premise and a good idea to explore. Of course, this being a Psycho movie, a series of murders start occurring again, all carrying Norman's old MO. With the town on edge and Norman being taunted and threatened left and right, has he returned to his old ways? If so, does he know that he's returned to his old ways? Or is someone else responsible for these crimes?
Okay, so the premise ain't bad, but yeah, it's gonna take a lot more than that to win me over, movie.
Anthony Perkins returns to his signature role as Norman Bates, and as soon as he shows up on screen, it becomes immediately apparent why he's become so iconic in this role.
Mary,
Yes?
I'm becoming confused again, aren't I?
Of course not.
Don't lie to me. Not you.
Vera Miles is also solid, reprising her role from the previous film, as is Robert Loggia as Norman's well-meaning psychiatrist, Dr. Raymond, though Meg Tilly as Norman's friend, Mary Samuels, well, she's definitely the weak link here.
Norman, your mother's dead. You killed her. You told me so yourself.
The film was directed by Richard Franklin, and while just about any director would pale in comparison to Hitchcock, I have to say, the TV caliber quality of his direction leaves a lot to be desired. Sure, there are some neat camera angles and a few scenes that are genuinely suspenseful, and I will give him credit for not outright copying the original. There's just not a whole lot of energy to his style, and it sometimes comes up short. Fortunately, the compelling mystery and a few decent twists do help remedy a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot to like in this movie. I was never bored by it. In fact, I was quite invested in it. I was really curious to see if Norman Bates was reformed or if he had fallen back into his old ways. So, does that mean Psycho 2 is an underrated sequel? Well, it does have a few really effective scenes, most of the cast is solid, and the story keeps you hooked to see it through. I mean, sure, the movie isn't even close to the same league as the incredible original, and I don't think the world would have been any worse off if this movie didn't exist. But strictly on its own merits, yeah, it kind of is an underrated sequel. It's not great, but it's decent.
So wait a minute. A half-assed belated sequel to an iconic movie is actually good?
This doesn't make any sense. These kinds of movies are never good. What does it mean? Am I losing my touch? Have I misjudged everything I've ever seen? Am I going mad? Am I?